You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on the Angry Marks Podcast Network.
You're listening to Glove Up or Shut Up on AngryMarks.com with Peter H. and Stevie J. Find them on Twitter at HardcoreCDN and at AngryMarks. And now, for all news, reviews, and interviews in mixed martial arts, it's time for Glove Up or Shut Up from AngryMarks.com.
Hey, welcome everybody to another episode of Glove Up or Shut Up right here on AngryMarks.com. My name is Peter H. I'm joined once again by my co-host from Omaha, Nebraska, Stevie J.
And we're joined by one of our favorite returning special guests from Sherdog and the LA Times and the Torch and so many other places. Todd Martin is joining us on the line. Good evening, Todd.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And boy, do we have a packed show and so much to talk about. It's been a very monumental last 7 days with 3 UFC shows and finally the official announcement that UFC has been sold. We kind of all knew it was in the works for a while. We had Dwayne Finley on a couple of weeks ago and it was good timing because Jeremy Botter had just broken the story at Flow Sports and it was being denied up and down and left and right by Dana White. But now we know it was for real. So let's start with that, Todd. What are your thoughts on UFC being sold to WME IMG?
I mean, certainly, given the status of the sport where it is right now, which is in a good spot, it always makes you a little bit nervous when things are thrown for a loop. Because I think that the status quo is a very positive status quo for fight fans, in the sense that you can quibble with the way that the current UFC management handles different things, the way it treats fighters, the way it handles media at times, the way it match makes at times. But the bottom line is they've found an equilibrium where the fights that you want get made. And that's not necessarily the easiest equilibrium to set up. I mean, if you look at the history of boxing, you look at kickboxing, there have been points all over the time, particularly now in boxing, where you don't get the fights you want. There isn't the pressure put on the fighters to fight each other. There isn't the concentration of fighters in one organization. There isn't the desire to always have the best fighting the best because of protectionism of the top stars, that you don't always get those fights. And right now we do. So there's a little bit of apprehension when you've got a new entity coming into the fold. With that said, they are all by all reports keeping a lot of the structure of what was already set up. Dana White is going to still be on board as the president of the organization. I think they recognize that they've got a good thing, and they're probably not going to make too many dramatic changes, and it's likely going to be in large part business as usual, which to me is a positive out of the whole thing.
And there's another positive, I believe, as well, since they are in the talent business and represent a lot of different people and a lot of different entertainment industries. There's some cross-promotional leverage that can be applied here. They could end up having UFC guys be in more movies. It could be one of those kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was probably part of the mentality, was that they dealt with fighters and other athletes in the context of the entertainment business in general and saw the possibilities for marketing those stars in different ways. And I think that was part of why they had interest in it in the first place, along with the fact that it's just a very profitable business.
Very profitable for Dana White as well. I've seen reports that say he cashed out and then bought back in, but the cash out was as high as $360 million for his share.
Yep, he did very well for himself.
Well, so did the Fertitta brothers. They bought it for $10 million and sold for $4 billion, so cha-ching.
Yeah, it's a heck of an investment. I think sometimes people understate the potential of the sport back in 2001 to sort of glamorize the job that they did. In that I think that the sport was extremely marketable. And the principal issue that was facing the sport was just issues of penetration and the inability to show it to larger audiences. I've been a believer since before they bought the company that if you showed this thing to a larger audiences, it would take off as a really, really popular sport. And the Fertittas, to their credit, were able to get those clearances, to get it back on pay-per-view, later to get it on television, and they were able to then showcase it to the masses, and the masses liked what they saw.
Coincidentally, I think that showcasing it to the masses kind of put the pressure on those remaining holdout states that didn't want to license and regulate MMA until the final domino fell just a little while ago with the state of New York. It's like, everybody wants this. Why aren't you guys doing this? You guys are looking like the last people on earth that should be turning down this kind of money and entertainment for your people.
Yeah, I mean, I can't quibble with any individual state that makes the decision that, hey, we don't want to be a part of something that is violent and probably bad for the health of some of the people involved. So I won't knock the desire of any state or municipality that would say that they wouldn't want to, but in terms of the practicality, it just didn't have much of an effect. I mean, UFC runs all over the place. As you mentioned, it was sanctioned everywhere. They were coming in very close to New York, drawing lots of money there. New York was really accomplishing nothing other than making less money than they would if they sanctioned MMA within their state. And I'd add that while I think that there are reasonable reasons for someone to think that we don't want to be a part of MMA, if you listen to the discussions in the New York State Assembly in terms of the reasons they were thinking that they didn't want to have MMA in there, a lot of them weren't perhaps the best reasoned and well thought out understanding of what the sport is and isn't.
Yeah, Peter and I had a pretty good laugh at some of those, including, I believe it was Rosie O'Donnell's own brother who said some very, very curious things in the New York State Assembly, but we won't delve into that kettle of fish again. I think it's just interesting that it all came to a head this year. It's like the final hurdle got cleared, and then all of a sudden the Fertittas said, well, we've achieved our goal here. We've taken this as far as we want to take it. And it's just like, some people will say they were only in it for the money, but if you bought for $10 billion and cashed in for $4 billion, why wouldn't you be happy? I mean, it's not like it's impeding the growth of the sport for them to sell. WME IMG doesn't want it to fail. They don't want their investment to go down in value. They clearly think $4 billion is a good price because they think it's just going to keep going up.
Yeah, as far as it goes in terms of like wrapping up New York and whatnot, I've never asked Lorenzo Fertitta this, but I would suspect that if I did, his answer would be that he does view himself and his brother as sort of stewards of the sport, that want to see it through. And so I think there was a sense, and this is entirely speculative on my part, but just based on things they've said over the years and the way they've handled the business, that they got behind this thing when it was low and they wanted to see it through and feel like they'd built it up to a place where it was secure and healthy. I mean, I think that's going to be a big part of their legacy when they pass away, is the role that they played in this fledgling sport that grew into something bigger. And I think it probably was something that was important to them to, feel like they had taken the sport to where it needed to be, and then they were ready to hand it off to someone else that could carry it from there. And while New York was certainly not necessary, it was a sort of wrapping up of a long-term battle that began 20 years ago over where MMA could take place, and now MMA is won. It's something that you can watch pretty much everywhere.
Absolutely. Peter, anything to add before we move on to all the news and all the shows?
Everywhere and every day, it seemed like this past week, that's for sure.
And a hell of a lot of it in Las Vegas, too, which is what we're going to talk about next. So why don't we start with the very first show that happened on Thursday? That would be the UFC Fight Night with Dos Anjos and Alvarez, and obviously the main event being the biggest, most notable part of that card with the shocking, just complete destruction of Rafael Dos Anjos, the way he had destroyed everybody that came before him in the division. I always knew Eddie Alvarez was good going back to the days when he was fighting with Michael Chandler and Bellator, but man, I never thought Eddie Alvarez would just tool Dos Anjos to that degree.
Yeah, it was certainly a very striking result. And I mean, I think, no pun intended, I think a lot of it was the way that Alvarez had looked in the UFC thus far. And for those of us who had seen Eddie Alvarez all those years, I mean, there was sort of a disconnect in that this was like a real, blood and guts warrior, a guy who had been in just incredible fights over the years, particularly in Dream were some of his most famous battles. But also in Bellator, pretty much everywhere he fought, he was known for having really exciting fights. And then he came to the UFC, and the Gilbert Melendez and Anthony Pettis fights, the 2 wins that got him a title shot, I thought were both terrible fights, and I don't think anyone looked good in them. I think, Alvarez was content to just sort of ride out the clock, do a little bit more, overtly stall in the Anthony Pettis fight, and it got him this title shot. And it was hard to sort of get up for the potential in this guy when he'd so switched what had made him successful early in his career. But against Rafael dos Anjos, he was much more the fighter that we saw during the period that he made his name. And I don't think every time that's necessarily going to play to his advantage, because I thought Dos Anjos was getting the better of the exchanges before Eddie Alvarez caught him. But Alvarez is a very dangerous guy to get into that game with, because he's a guy that will stand in the pocket, will be able to take a shot, to give a shot, and who has a lot of power when he lands right.
I know I'm jumping ahead a little by saying this, but I almost felt like I saw the same thing happen in the Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Claudia Gadelha fight, because at first it seemed like Gadelha was just going to get in the pocket, stand with her, trade, and Joanna wouldn't be able to weather the storm. But then in those later rounds, it was like, okay, this is playing to her advantage, because now Gadelha is completely spent, and the next 3 rounds, Joanna just tooled her. So it was like the same Eddie Alvarez strategy early, only it didn't pay off.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different fights, sort of in different directions. I mean, well, I won't get too much into the Joanna fight. We can discuss that when we get to that. Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, it kind of made me flash to that when you said it. So, Peter, your thoughts on Eddie Alvarez capturing the lightweight title?
I thought this fight would at least go to a second round, but man, Alvarez just found that 5th gear and caught Dos Anjos. I mean, it's hard to really get a sample size of this fight when it only went less than 4 minutes.
True. But in hindsight now, going back to our show when we talked about him training 150, 200 rounds,
yeah.
and you thought he overtrained, but maybe now in hindsight you don't necessarily think that.
I've been proven wrong before on this show, that's for sure.
Well, we both have. In fact, if you look at my record of picks on Observer this year, I've been proven wrong a lot. Holy cow. I'm like number 2 or number 1 at the bottom of the list right now. I'm hanging around right. It's so much for my great record of picks last year, but then with all the upsets this year, who could have seen this coming? Well, not me, apparently.
What's your record in title fights, Stevie?
Yeah, that's probably the worst of all. I'm actually glad it's averaged out over the whole record, because in title fights alone, I'd be terrible. I should just pick every upset from now on. That's about the only way to pick title fights anymore. But speaking of upsets, I don't know if Derek Lewis and Roy Nelson was, but I was certainly upset at the decision. I didn't think Derek Lewis won that fight, but Todd was there in person, so let's get his thoughts.
I had Derek Lewis winning the fight. It was sort of funny. I watched the fight, and I thought Lewis won the fight, as I mentioned. But I mentioned that on Twitter, and I immediately got a vociferous backlash. It's not that, when I give a pick on a close fight, I'll generally get people disagreeing, but this was like, no, you're an idiot. What are you talking about? Which to me was sort of a sign that, maybe there are a lot of people feel strong the other way. And then watching it live, of course, the fans really disliked the decision. They were booing it very loudly. So my perception watching was like, okay, I was in the distinct minority. And then the next day I checked to see what the general consensus was on MMA decisions, which, is an aggregator of media decisions along with fans voting. And in fact, it was like 2 or 3 to 1 people saying Lewis won amongst the media. So I wasn't, I guess it's just sort of a lot of different opinions as opposed to me being in the minority on this one. I thought that, ultimately it just sort of comes down to what you see in a fight. I mean, not Lewis. Nelson got a takedown in that 3rd round. Sorry, backing up. It was 1-1, very clearly going into the 3rd round. Nelson got takedowns in the 3rd round and held position for longer, but Lewis landed the better shots. Granted, it was a small number of shots, but it's sort of the classic question of how do you weigh control versus concentrated damage at particular points? And I tend to lean towards damage if the control doesn't lead to anything, whether it's a submission attempt, whether it's damage over a period of time. I thought Nelson was just holding him, and I thought Lewis landed some big shots, including a shot where it was sort of like a pro wrestling spot where he landed this shot and Nelson's head went up, way up in the air like he was selling it, and something flew out of the air like he was selling that he lost a tooth or something. So it was a big shot, the biggest shot of the fight. And between that and a flurry early on, I gave Lewis the fight for that reason. But certainly, I mean, it's hard to argue the other direction, just in that it's different, it's different strokes for different folks. I mean, it depends on what you weigh in a fight. And I thought it was sort of ironic the way it turned out, because this is the sort of fight where, over the last, 5 to 10 years, Nelson has been railing against the fighter in his position. Like if you took out Nelson and Lewis and you had two fighters reenact it, the Roy Nelson of the last 5 years would say, oh, clearly Derek Lewis won this fight. He's the guy looking to land the blows. The other guy's just looking to stall. And it sort of got turned around on him here.
I think I'm going to only speak for myself, and I'm clearly in the minority based on MMA decisions, but to me, it was actually more impressive seeing Nelson take down a guy of Derek Lewis's size, strength, and punching ability. The fact that we all know Roy Nelson could take a punch, and he probably could have stood there for 15 minutes and taken punches if he had to, not that we would want him to, but that he found the way not to and got this big, humongous guy standing in front of him off his feet. And these weren't just small, like, oh, I caught you on a leg kick and tripped your other leg. He was physically wrapping himself around both legs and dumping the guy onto his back. And every time he did it, I admit, I popped for it like, damn, you took him down again. Holy crap. I didn't think you could. That guy was too big and too heavy and too strong, and you still got him on his back. So, to me, that was a form of dominance without necessarily winning in dominant striking. He was dominating the position in the cage.
Yeah, well, certainly I think of those, the control he had on the ground, probably the most impressive part was the falling down, because it made such a loud noise, and each time, the crowd reacted big to when, Lewis would just, fall down to the mat. I'm with you on that one. They were very impressive, takedowns, particularly a couple. I mean, some of them were just sort of standard, but there were a couple where he sort of lifted him up and, kabam. It was a sight to see.
And the announcers, you couldn't necessarily hear them, but on TV they were talking about the cage shaking every time that Nelson got another takedown. Ironically enough, they were selling it like the Brock Lesnar Big Show match that destroyed the ring. That's how they were talking about it.
Well, the thing I liked about that fight, and it was by no means a great fight, but the thing I enjoyed about the fight was that, like, they every time that something big would happen, it felt like it built up. Like, there wouldn't be a lot happening in the stand-up, and then boom, they'd go in with a big exchange, and then people sort of gathered their senses, and there would be a slowdown, and then boom, there would be another exchange, and people would get up again, or, like they'd be clinching by the cage, and he'd sort of be working, and finally, kaboom, down he went. There wasn't a lot of action, but everything was spaced out, so they got a lot out of everything that happened, which, you don't see in a lot of fights, and I was kind of amused by.
You're absolutely right, though. The moments of action were even bigger because of the moments of inaction. So it was definitely a fun fight to watch. But let me get Peter's opinion. Who do you think won this fight?
I agree, 29-28 Lewis, but
boom!
Wow.
Sorry.
I think it was for this fight, if Derek Lewis falls down in the fourth, anybody here?
I think everybody in the world here, or at least everybody in the whole Vegas city heard.
Jeez. It was a good, 29-28, good fight. I don't know what you do with Nelson. He's down, is he down 2 spots to 12 now? Lewis up 1 spot to 11 in the latest rankings. I don't know. I don't want to say gatekeeper, but if you look at 12 through 15, you got Nelson, Mears, Struve, and Magomedov. So who the hell do you have Nelson fight next in that group?
That's a good question. Todd, what do you think?
I mean, Nelson's just at the point of his career, and he was before this, quite frankly, where you just find fights that sound kind of fun to match him up with.
Yeah.
I think Nelson's got enough of there's enough interest in Nelson, and he's sort of a unique enough personality that, you can just match him up with random guys in the division, and it'll have fan interest because of who Roy Nelson is.
True.
Does that speak to the thin competition right now at heavyweight compared to the other weight divisions?
Well, compared to most of the other weight divisions,
Yeah.
I would actually put heavyweight above light heavyweight at this point, given the disaster area that is light heavyweight, and I put everything above flyweight. But other than those two divisions, yeah, I mean the heavyweight division is in a very weak state. Well, you know what? I mean, it has been a weak state for a while. I'd actually say it's a little bit better right now. I paused because I was going to say it's worse than it's been, but I think it's actually a little bit better now because, Overeem has a little bit of momentum. Junior Dos Santos has a little bit of momentum. Cain Velasquez has some momentum. And obviously then you've got, Miocic is the champion and Verdun was looking good for a while. So you actually do have a number of, and Ben Rothwell was on a roll for a while. So you've got a number of players that I think there's interest in. But the depth certainly isn't that strong. And I think it is one of the weaker divisions in the UFC.
Well, we also have one other thing going for the heavyweight division right now. Brock Lesnar went from being unranked to number 8 overnight.
For a one-time only fight.
Well, Brock Lesnar said in his post-fight press conference, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but Todd can attest to this. Brock Lesnar said, "I do what I want, where I want, to who I want. And if I want another fight, I'll take it."
He did indeed say that in a question from a reporter that seemed like kind of a setup for him to say that. But what can you do?
Yeah, well, we'll talk more about that in a minute. But there were 2 other fights on the main
We really don't have to.
Oh, well, I guess we don't. But there are some amusing things about Brock Lesnar that I do want to get into later. But in the meantime, Jaban and Muhammad. So, unanimous decision, but very interesting scores here. 28-27, 29-28, 29-27. I wish I'd actually seen the scorecards. Todd probably has. Maybe you can help me understand who scored what and why.
Geez, I haven't actually seen the scorecards. Obviously Jaban won I shouldn't say obviously, but my recollection was the Jaban won the first and second, and he was really dominating Muhammad. So I think the likelihood is that the judges gave him a 10-8 first, at least the judges that had it 29-27. And Muhammad came on strong in the third. I'm actually reconstructing it now. I'm pretty sure about this. So, I think some judges would have had the first round 10-9 Juban. Some would have had it 10-8 Juban. The second round, everyone would have had 10-9 Juban. And the third round, some would have had it 10-9 Muhammad, and some would have had it 10-8 Muhammad. So if you've got a 10-8 third and a 10-8 first, that's 28-27. And if you've got a 10-8 first and not a 10-8 third, that's a 29-27. I think you said the other was 29-28. That's obviously 3-10-9. So not having seen the scorecards, I mean, they sent it to me. I didn't open the link. That is what I think happened there. And it was a terrific fight. I mean, I thought that, Jaban was just blitzing Muhammad in the early going. He just looked like a much better fighter. He knocked him down hard on 3 separate occasions in the first 2 rounds. It looked like, he was just higher class, but Muhammad hung in there. In the third round, he turned it around, and he was really laying in some big shots on Jaban. He was pressuring him, hurting him. He was trying to finish that fight because he knew he needed that finish, and he wasn't able to quite get the finish. And Jaban was able to hold on for the decision. But I thought it was an impressive performance by Jaban overall because of how he looked early on. But I thought Muhammad showed a tremendous amount of heart. I thought it was a terrific fight, probably the second best fight of the weekend.
Yeah, 2 takeaways from that. First of all, you did an excellent job of breaking down the scorecards, and I agree with your analysis on it. The second takeaway I have is Bilal Muhammad is a guy I had interviewed when he was still on the regional circuit, and his nickname was Remember the Name Bilal Muhammad. And now, after that third round in UFC, I think people will remember the name Bilal Muhammad. I think he has lived up to that nickname with that fight.
Yeah, I mean, that was a performance that stamped him as someone to pay attention to.
Absolutely. Peter, your thoughts on this fight?
I don't think Juban. I don't think it was smart giving Muhammad a chance in the third round to basically, you're down 2 rounds. I'm going to just throw everything including the kitchen sink at you, and basically Juventus went into survival mode for 5 minutes. But, he's going to walk away with the victory. Muhammad, if he poured it on just a little bit more in the second round, it could have been a totally different fight, and he might have won this one.
Maybe so, but them's the breaks, and like you always say at the end of every show, Peter, never leave it to the judges. And Joseph
Absolutely.
Duffy certainly did not. We talked about how he made his name by holding a win over Conor McGregor, but this time he gets his name for quickly dispatching Mitch Clark.
Yeah, that was a terrific performance by Joseph Duffy. I mean, he had come into the UFC with a lot of hype because of the fact that he had beaten McGregor, and he backed up every bit of it in his first 2 fights. And that, there was a lot of interest in the guy and a lot of hype about what he would be able to do based on how impressive he was in those first 2 fights. But then they decided, hey, this guy's looking good. Let's match him with Dustin Poirier. And Dustin Poirier is a monster in his own right. And Dustin Poirier just destroyed the dude. And at that point, it was sort of, I think, a real question as to where Duffy would go from there. Not that, in a sense, he was some sort of, existential crisis, but just that, he got beaten so badly. That's the sort of fight that it's difficult to recover from, even putting aside the issue of sort of what it said about where he stood in the division. But, I mean, make no mistake, this was a statement. He came back and he looked really impressive, hit Clark hard from very early on. When it went to the ground, he was able to showcase tremendous power from that position as well. And then he locked in a choke on a guy that's a submission artist himself. And that's really Clark's calling card is his submissions. Just a great performance by Joseph Duffy.
Can't say it any better than that, so I'll let Peter say what he wants.
How did Duffy not get a performance of the night bonus on this?
Good question.
Oh wow, he didn't. Interesting. Yeah, I had forgotten who got the specific bonuses there, but yeah, he certainly obviously Alvarez got one, and I figure Muhammad and Joban. So then someone else got a bonus. That
Munoz for tapping out Russell Doan in the first round in the prelims.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'd certainly give that one to Joseph Duffy.
Yeah. Well, maybe he got one of those discretionary bonuses that have been so much to talk over the last couple of days.
Hope so.
I have no idea. But since we already talked about the Munoz fight, is there any other fight on these prelims that you want to focus on, Todd?
Nope. Those are the key ones.
Right. I would say just Mina and Pyle, that flying knee was pretty sweet.
Yeah, that was a highlight reel flying knee. That one will be shown many times this year, I'm sure.
That was a sad performance in general, I thought, and that Pyle, he's a guy that's been in the sport from very, very early on, and he just looked like he had nothing left. I mean, this was just, it was just him getting smashed from beginning to end, and not looking good at all in the process. So sort of a sad night for Mike Pyle.
So he kind of fell victim to his own nickname. He got bogged down in the quicksand.
I was just waiting for it. I was hoping I was wrong that you were going to do it, but you did it.
I couldn't resist it. I mean, in fact, that was one of the nicknames we were talking about on last week's show. Like, out of all the bad nicknames in MMA, that one's actually kind of cool to me. I like it, but it didn't pay out in his favor. He got stuck in his own gimmick.
It's a good nickname. It's a bad usage of the nickname in this context.
Yeah, I suppose so. All right, we move on from the Dos Anjos Alvarez fight night to the card I alluded to a little bit ago that was headlined by Joanna Champion and Claudia Gadelha. I think I've already given my analysis of the fight, so I'll defer to Todd now for his.
I thought it was a great fight. I alluded to the Muhammad Joban being the second best fight of the weekend, and that was this being the best fight of the weekend. I thought that Claudia early on looked like she was going to take it to Joanna. Not even looked like she was going to. She was taking it to Joanna. She was taking her down. Even in the stand-up, she was able to land a couple good shots. I mean, she was imposing her game on Joanna, but Joanna kept pushing. She kept pushing. She wouldn't let Claudia get comfortable, and it drained Claudia. And it drained Claudia as Joanna kept getting up and kept working for shots of her own. And then sort of in the middle of the third round, after Claudia had been in control, the tide turned, and I wrote it on Twitter when it happened, but I think basically on the line, I think the tide just turned, and I watched the broadcast when I got back, and right around the same point, Joe Rogan or not Joe Rogan, I think Brian Stan and whoever it was with, one of them said, I think the tide just turned, because it was this big breaking point into the fight where Claudia just reached the wall of being able to push it all the way on Joanna. And I mean, she was still able to fight for another, 10, 12 minutes. But in order to beat someone as good as Joanna, you've got to be able to keep putting out a really high output. And Joanna was able to keep going. Claudia, ran low on the steam, and Joanna just pushed right through. And from there on, she was landing the better shots. She had the great movement. She was landing solid shots, and she took over. I thought it was a real showcase of Joanna's qualities as a champion. I thought it was a real showcase performance for Joanna, and what's been a great MMA career thus far. And I thought this was her most impressive night against a very worthy opponent.
I'll take this moment to give myself a congratulatory pat on the back for last week's show, because I said to Peter, the only way you're going to beat Joanna Champion is to kill her. She just has too much won't quit, never die attitude. And that really came through, because she did take quite a bit of a shellacking in those first 2 rounds, but she didn't go away, she didn't quit, she didn't die. And Claudia Gadelha was so big and so strong in getting all those takedowns and landing those power shots that gas tank just expired. And I always suspected it would, because Gadelha is a very muscular strawweight. She's always been one of the biggest and strongest strawweights around. But when you're that big and that strong and you take people down a lot, sooner or later you get tired. So I'm not surprised the way it turned out. Peter, what about you?
It was at one point of this fight, it was like, come on, finish her, like in a Mortal Kombat game. It's like, finish her. It's like, come on. And then Joanna just got out of the submission, or she avoided danger, and you're like, uh-oh, I think this is going round 3, round 4. Yep, okay, there we go. It's like, once you turn that corner, it's like, Gadelha's gotta be like, in between rounds thinking, what do I have to do besides Stevie's suggestion of murder in the cage? I mean, what else can you really do here? Because it's like, she's just gonna keep coming and coming like the Energizer Bunny.
Yeah, and that 5th round in particular, well, maybe the 4th round more so than the 5th, but either one you could say was arguably 10-8 Joanna Champion, and based on the judges' scorecards, I think she got a 10-8 in one of those 2, but probably the 4th.
I think I gave her a 10-8 in the 5th. I could be wrong about that. But they were both pretty darn one-sided.
Yeah, and you got a good look at Gadelha's face at the end of either one of those rounds. You would have said, it doesn't matter what she did in the first 2. If you could even just go pride scoring and look at her face and go, yeah, she's the loser of this fight.
Yeah, this was one, if somehow, like, the tide had turned like a little bit later in the 3rd round, because Claudia was doing better early in the 3rd round. I mean, this would have been the ultimate. The scorecards don't reflect who the real winner of this fight was, because it didn't matter what the scorecards said. This was Joanna Jędrzejczyk's fight.
Right, and this one to me made the point that all along these two had been bickering and battering back and forth the whole season, with Gadelha saying, you didn't really beat me, it was a split decision, I know who really won that fight. Well, this to me was Gadelha's chance to make the point that she won the first time and got screwed, but instead it was Jędrzejczyk who made the point, no, you didn't get screwed, I'm the better fighter, and I just proved it to you decisively.
Well, I mean, I don't know if it necessarily reflects on the first fight, because I mean, if they'd fought another 3-round fight, which is what the first fight was, Claudia wins the fight. So, I think Joanna showed herself to be better than Claudia, but I mean, if this were like a different context, I'd be like, Claudia, if I were Claudia, I'd be like, yeah, you beat me a 5-rounder. Well, I challenge you to a 3-rounder next. Cause I'm the real champion of the 3-rounder.
No. Let's just do a one-time only. Let's have a 7-round fight. Let's just go till someone passes out or something, because 3, 5, why not 7?
That would be my counter if I'm Joanna. And we can negotiate from there.
All right, gentlemen, the next fight on this card was probably the least exciting fight I saw the whole darn time, all 3 shows, because Andrew Sanchez held Khalil down and did nothing. And if you disagree with that assessment, Todd, tell me.
I do not disagree, and I've got nothing more to add about that fight.
Okay, Peter, do you have anything to add about Sanchez and Roundtree?
Well, I think I might have to design something for this podcast TV. It's called the Ben Askren Award. For fights like this.
Not fair.
Come on. You got to do that to Ben Askren. Oh.
He likes tormenting me with that because I'm a Ben Askren fan and I'm not apologetic about it.
It's like, hold him down, do something. I was yelling. Like, my neighbor, I think at one point got off because I heard upstairs like the slamming of a door. Like, oh geez, they're awake. It's like, come on, do something. Just, it was awful.
Well, in hindsight, that's part of the reason you changing Dahlia was so great because I was almost bored to sleep by the fight before it, and it was getting pretty late at night at that point. But then that women's title fight at the end made up for it in spades. It's like, oh, you brought me all the way back with this one. It was like we had the WWE style pay-per-view where they have the match that nobody cares about. This is the popcorn match. This is the bathroom break, and then we came back for the real main event.
Yeah, they were the all-night express of the evening.
Yes, they were. And I swear I could be making this up, but it looked like there was visible disgust on Dana White's face when this was time to hand out the trophy, so to speak.
I actually thought he was much more positive than I was expecting him to be.
I could have sworn I saw a scowl, but maybe that's just me.
After the weekend he had, come on. Up and down with Dana.
He was definitely happier when he gave the trophy to Tatiana Suarez. I don't think any of us can dispute that.
No, but the Sanchez Roundtree fight, the only way this fight could be worse is if it went 5 rounds.
It could be worse than that. It could be 7 rounds.
Oh, don't do that.
Honestly, the most interesting part of that whole fight to me was the fact that 2 judges actually gave 2 10-8s. Like, okay, nothing happened in that fight, but Khalil did so little to stop nothing happening in that fight that they actually gave 10-8s just for, you got totally whipped even though nothing happened to you.
If he got a 6-month medical suspension, I'll be shocked. Because he got no damage whatsoever in that fight.
Yeah, I don't even know how you could get a medical suspension off just getting held down, but maybe. Anyway, Suarez and Cooper. So Cooper is gonna need some work if she's gonna stick around in UFC. I haven't heard that she got her walking papers, but this was a very one-sided fight. Todd?
Yeah, they generally give people who are in the finals, I mean, pretty much universally, people who are in the finals get another fight. So I think she'll get another fight, but Tatiana was clearly a higher caliber of fighter. And we'll see how Tatiana does once she gets into the competition on the main roster. The women's divisions, unlike a lot of other divisions, you frequently have more inexperienced fighters that do well. So I think she could potentially she could potentially be giving trouble to some of the fighters that are ranked high in the division pretty quickly.
Yeah, Suarez will be making a name for herself in short order if she hasn't already, but Cooper, if she wants to be a factor, she needs a ground game. She needs defense on takedowns, and she needs to be able to fight her way out of danger on the ground when it does get there. She showed nothing.
No, you're right. The darts choke was simply put very, very nice. I mean, I always like, that's one of my favorite chokes to see in a fight, and it's like, oh, she's going for, oh, there you go. Like, just done.
It kind of threw me for a loop because I could swear the announcers said Japanese necktie, and I'm like, darts choke. And they're going on and on about the Japanese necktie, and I'm like, okay, call it whatever you want to. There's 3 names for everything.
Yeah, next thing is you can't hold the belt.
Yeah. All right. So, Will Brooks and Ross Pearson. I'm not surprised Will Brooks won his UFC debut. They gave him a winnable opponent, but maybe not as dominant as he showed in his Bellator days. Todd?
Yeah, it was a tough fight for Will Brooks to look impressive because Pearson's a guy who's game. I mean, he doesn't win every fight, but he hangs in there, and pretty much all of his fights are competitive fights. And that was what you got here. I mean, Pearson's a difficult guy to look spectacular against. I thought Brooks was better than Pearson, and I wouldn't necessarily make that much of it in terms of Brooks's long-term future within the UFC lightweight division. But yeah, Pearson hung in there, and this was certainly not a dominant performance by any means by Brooks. It was a close competitive fight.
I'll say this much though. I think Will Brooks looked better in his jump from Bellator to UFC than Eddie Alvarez did in the same position. And we know where Alvarez is now, so maybe the future for Brooks is even brighter than Alvarez. Only time will tell.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if you had me bet on those guys going into the UFC, I'd put more money on Brooks, because Brooks is a younger guy, and he hasn't been through as many wars. Whereas Alvarez, well, he's a guy that's, turning a lot of impressive performances. I think when we look back, we might look at the highlights of Eddie Alvarez's career as being principally before his UFC time. And I think that when we look at the highlights of Will Brooks' career, I think there's a good chance that the biggest highlights will be during the UFC portion of his career.
I agree. I think the best is yet to come for Will Brooks. So, Peter, your thoughts?
I mean, I agree with you both. I just hope whoever they put in front of him next is someone of a higher caliber than a Ross Pearson.
I would say...
Like, Ross Pearson's on the tail end of his career. You gotta put someone someone in the higher ranking and just give Brooks a real test. Pearson, okay, it was 29-28 across the board, but, give someone that Brooks can really show why he's an elite fighter.
Well, I was going to say, before you jump back in, that it wouldn't be a problem to give him a higher ranked opponent now because he is ranked number 12 after this fight. So he's going to be in line now to fight guys like Michael Chiesa, Beneil Dariush, Anthony Pettis. There are guys above him that he's going to have some very, very good fights with.
Michael Johnson would be good.
Oh yeah, he's right behind, two behind Johnson and Dariush, so either one of them would be a good quality fight. So,
what about you, Todd? Do you think would be a good matchup for Will Brooks in his next fight?
Honestly, I'm content to see him against, pretty much everyone. The thing with the lightweight division is that it's a deep division.
It is.
So, I mean, you can match him up, and I think Pearson fits into that. I mean, he's a guy that's a little bit farther down, but I think he's a tough guy. I think there's a range of fighters, across the board. I think that Dariush would be a good opponent, and that Dariush has generally been looking pretty darn good. He had the one setback, against, who was it? Was it against Chiesa or was it against someone else? But he was rolling, but then he had the one loss, but then he rebounded from it and looked really good in his next fight. And so I'd be interested to see how he matches up against Will Brooks. But again, as I said, there are tons of matchups I'd like to see there.
It was Chiesa. You're right about that.
Oh, good. I wasn't sure if it was.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Slipped and got caught in a rear naked choke in the second round of their fight. So, two other fights on this card, the main card anyway, that ended in very quick fashion. One a little under 3 minutes and one a little over a half minute. And that's Doo Ho Choi knocking out Thiago Tavares and Joaquin Silva knocking out Andrew Holbrook. So, I'm combining those together because to me they're kind of the same story. Todd, what do you say?
Hold up. I'm not with you on that one. Like the story of Joaquim Silva is he's this scary looking Brazilian guy that looks like Vanderlei Silva and just came out there and was scary against Andrew Holbrook. Whereas Doo Ho Choi is like the opposite. Yeah, he was spectacular with the strikes, but he looks like a little friendly kid in ninth grade. I mean, like if you match these guys up against each other, everyone would be like, "Oh, Silva's gonna kill." And granted, Silva's a higher weight division, but so I mean, maybe he would. But like I love Doo Ho Choi, the Korean Superboy, because he looks scrawny. He's got facially, he looks like he's about 14 years old, but he fights like a monster. I mean, he just knocks one person after another out. I mean, I think that guy has a real potential star quality about him just because he's so unique. I'm sort of joking because they're sort of similar in terms of quick knockouts. But yeah, very, very different types. Doo Ho Choi and Joaquim Silva.
Yeah, well, definitely in terms of their look, they're completely different. I grant you that. But in a way, Doo Ho Choi kind of reminds me of, obviously not the Takanori Gomi of present, because we've seen what happened to the present day Gomi, but of years past where he was the fireball kid and he looked like such a nice kid, but he could put your lights out in a fight.
Yeah, and he was a little bit of a bad boy too, though. Like in terms of like the way that he'd sometimes conduct himself. Whereas Troy just seems like I mean, granted, we don't know much other than he smiles a lot and knocks people out, but he seems like a very subdued guy. I want to see more of him. I'm intrigued by a lot of fights that he could potentially have at featherweight.
Absolutely. Well, I'm intrigued by fights both of them could have in their respective weight classes. Peter, what do you say?
The Korean Superboy?
Yes.
Sounds like a boy band or something. Yeah, Troy was really impressive. Man, that's another division, the featherweights, that, that's gonna be, for the next 6 months, a very deep and competitive division. As far as Silva, you took the words out of my mouth. When I saw him come out, I'm like, oh god, I don't feel good for Holbrook right here, because Silva does look scary. And it's
maybe we should call him Mini Vanderlei from now on.
It's funny. When you mentioned Silva, I thought to myself, please tell me he trains with headgear.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so, any other fights strike your fancy on the prelim card, Peter?
The first one, the Jing Liang against, Anton Zafir. The knockout to start the Fight Pass prelims.
Yeah, actually, the 2 Fight Pass fights on this card were arguably better than the 4 that actually made it to Fox Sports 1. Todd, what do you say?
I don't think there's much of an argument in the other direction. I mean, I would say closer to unquestionably better than the fights there. Yeah, not a lot of note. I was happy to see Gray Maynard get a win after struggling for so many years. And, I thought, as alluded to, Kevin Lee looked really impressive against Jake Matthews, who's a tough opponent in his own right. And, the flyweights were awful, which I appreciated as it gave me a chance to bury the flyweights.
Yeah, I don't think anybody was happy with that Nicolau Moraga fight, and Moraga certainly couldn't have been when the scorecards were read, but I think that fight made everybody want to pack up and go home. Like, okay, we don't need to see anything else. Show's over. Good night.
The main event was the Fight of the Night bonus, and performance went to Suarez, and Choi. So Suarez, for those who don't remember, she won her fight with a Darce choke at 3:43 of the first round over Amanda Cooper.
Yep, we talked about that one. So, yep.
Okay.
We're moving on then to UFC 200, which, boy, where do I even begin with this? I guess I'll start with John Jones bombing out of the card with a failed drug test before the card could take place. And they had a press conference, and a couple of press conferences that were assembled in hasty order, first to announce he was out, then to announce who was in to fight Daniel Cormier instead. So, to our man on the scene who was there in Vegas, I go to Todd Martin.
Yeah, I actually wasn't in Vegas at the time that they announced his dropping out, and I was in flight as he was doing his press conference the next day. But it was quite the scene. I mean, it's John Jones. I mean, what do you expect at this point? He says over and over and over again how he's changed and how, he's doing things better and whatnot, but it's never true. It's always something else. And, this was no different. It was more of the same from John Jones. The MMA's perpetual screw up.
Yeah, which led to jokes on Peter's part that for the first time ever in UFC history, they might be stripping an interim champion of the title. I don't think that's a joke anymore. If they haven't already, I think they kind of have to.
I don't think they've stripped him yet, to be honest.
I haven't heard that they have, but what choice do they have if he's going to be sat down for 2 years? They can't leave an interim belt on him.
See, the thing is, Stevie, like, Todd, you were in the air, and, like, you were like Joe Silva when you texted Dana White that press conference midnight saying, what the fuck, and Fertitta goes, welcome to Vegas. I had the same moment the next morning when I woke up and my phone blew up at like 6 a.m. I had 5 different messages from 4 different people saying, did you hear about Jones? And I'm thinking, okay, either everyone is screwing with me or Jones did something, and it's like, of course.
What's funny for me is the first message I got actually was from my wife because she had seen it on ESPN or Twitter or somewhere, and she said, oh no, Jones does it again. And I'm like, what? Did they find Coke on him? What did he do now?
No, they found Pepsi, Stevie.
Todd said it best, I think, at the beginning here when he called him UFC's perennial screw up or perennial failure.
Yeah.
I don't remember which way you put it, but it's Jones at this point. We've just come to expect this.
Can you put that on a t-shirt, Todd?
You can put anything on a t-shirt. The guy I feel bad for is freaking Cormier, because I mean, this guy had worked so hard to get this fight, and granted, I don't think he was going to win it, but he'd earned that opportunity to go in there and prove he's the best, and it was taken from him, because, you know, John Jones, is John Jones.
Now, I've seen a couple of reports. I don't know how they would know this or who at USADA would have leaked this to them, but Chael Sonnen, at least among other people, has said that what actually was the thing that he got popped for in the USADA test was estrogen blockers. What do you make of that, Todd?
Well, I would assume that if those people are correct, and I have no reason to know whether they would or wouldn't be, that it probably would have leaked from John Jones' side as opposed to from USADA's side, that someone in his camp, heard about it and then passed it along. That would be my guess. As far as the estrogen blockers, I mean, my understanding is this is something that's used to, deal with the downside of, chemically enhancing, whether it's taking testosterone or other forms of steroids. And it fits with what happened last year, where there was a abnormally low levels of testosterone in one of John Jones's testing, which wasn't a sign in and of itself of him doping, but rather was a sign that he was doing something to respond to the doping, or the downside of doping, where you sort of have a high and then you have a low. And this is sort of a similar thing, where you catch the signals, or the products that are used as, responses to the actual performance enhancers. So, I mean, that's what would be going on if those reports are correct.
Right. And one of the side effects of, as you said, taking things that deplete your testosterone level is that when your estrogen level is higher than your testosterone level in the male body, you get gynecomastia. And I don't know how else to explain it other than it makes a man more like a woman. That's the most polite way I could put it.
Yeah, you just sort of have puffier sort of nipples and chest area, which was the case with John Jones. You know, there was sort of a little bit of sort of puffiness there, relative to some other fighters. I mean, it wasn't by any means like distracting or particularly strong, but it was something that you would notice with them.
Definitely. So, John Jones is going to be out for a while, presumably 2 years. We'll know once they make the official ruling. The Nevada State Athletic Commission will weigh in on the fact that both the A and the B sample came back positive for whatever it came back positive for, whether it was estrogen blockers or something else. We'll find out once they had the hearing. But in the meantime, on very short notice and coming in at 198 pounds after having had gallbladder surgery, Anderson the Spider Silva as the late replacement. So, Todd, were you positive or negative when you heard that Silva was the replacement to face Cormier?
Positive. I mean, particularly given that the other people that were talking about was Dan Henderson, which wasn't a particularly enticing option given that Cormier had demolished him before, or Mousasi, which just wasn't a particularly flashy fight. So I thought Silva was a really good make good by the UFC on short notice. And it certainly benefited Silva a lot. I mean, I think this is something that people will talk about years from now. You know, that he went in there and he stepped up and he took on this really tough fight on short notice, and the people loved him for it. I mean, he was the most popular fighter on the card, because of sort of the symbolism of this guy that's sort of this all-time great stepping in last minute. The negative on the whole thing, and it wasn't something I'd really thought about until the fight started, but it was obvious once the fight started, was what a bad position it put Cormier in. Because when you're taking the fight on short notice, it was sort of, the fight was presented as a sort of a make good fight. It wasn't like you had the two top fighters in the division that had been fighting for a long period of time and needed to prove who was better with their respective styles. I mean, this was Anderson Silva, a guy who hadn't been training, who'd had his gallbladder removed, who was fighting on 2 days' notice against a guy who, you know, naturally outweighed him by, you know, maybe 25 pounds, maybe a little bit more than that, 30 pounds, who's this world-class wrestler. And everyone knew going in that Cormier could out-wrestle Anderson Silva. I mean, it wasn't like that was some sort of question. That was the right way to win the fight, but it wasn't like there was a drama to that. So, of course, people wanted to see Cormier stand up with Anderson Silva. Now, did that make Cormier wrong for not wanting to stand with Anderson Silva? Of course not. That would be stupid to stand there in front of the arguably the best striker in the history of the sport just because the fans wanted him to do it. I mean, it put him, though, Daniel Cormier, in this really tough position where the crowd booed him, and he lost all the sympathy he gained over what happened with John Jones. But the flip side was fighting a really stupid fight that he might very well lose. That just wouldn't make any sense. So Cormier was just put in a terrible position. I felt bad for him in that sense. But as far as just sort of a fight that sounded interesting on paper and sort of had a big star on short notice, yeah, I thought it was a very cool last minute move by the UFC and Silva.
And since you've talked about the result already, I have to concur with you that I felt bad hearing the crowd boo him too, because he was put in an unwinnable situation with that fight. Like, if I go out there and do what the crowd wants, I could get knocked out, and I'm supposed to be the UFC light heavyweight champion, and I could get knocked out by a short notice replacement. You know, people will say Anderson Silva is the greatest of all time, but 2 days notice, gallbladder surgery, and I just got knocked out by this guy. And he didn't want to go down like that. And you can't blame him for not wanting to go down like that. The crowd might want to blame him, but to us, you know, weren't there in Vegas, it made perfect sense for Cormier to do exactly what he did.
Yeah, and as I was alluding to earlier, I'd also defend the crowd, because I heard many more people criticizing the crowd than criticizing Cormier. But I can understand where the crowd was coming from too. I mean, they were expecting this Cormier Jones fight. They didn't get it. They were paying hundreds of dollars for these tickets, and this fight is sort of this make good fight for the fans. And you know, they knew going in what would happen if Cormier, you know, out wrestled them for 3 rounds. There wasn't a drama in that. So I don't blame them for being frustrated by the way the fight went, but by the same token, I don't blame DC for implementing the game plan he did either. I think it was just sort of they were all put in an unfortunate position by John Jones.
I'd say the only reason I would take exception to the crowd would be that they didn't have to get a fight at all. They didn't have to find a late notice replacement to fight Daniel Cormier. They didn't have to get to see 2 legendary fighters. I will consider Cormier a legend, not maybe on Anderson Silva's level, but he has established himself as a multi-time champion in various promotions and deserves to be the UFC light heavyweight champion at this point, with John Jones being such a colossal screw-up. So, to me, you got to see 2 legends fight, and whether you liked the fight or not, it was still 2 legends fighting.
Yeah, but I mean, they can still want more from the actual fight that they got. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, of having expectations of, particularly given the circumstances, that it was this sort of make good fight. If this were Pride, where the emphasis was much more on putting on a show as opposed to the wins and losses being so incredibly important, I think there's a much higher likelihood that the fighters involved would say, okay, let's just go out there and have a fun fight, and if it means that I lose, then it means that I lose, because I'm going to go out there and just, you know, have an exciting fight and swing it out. In the UFC, there isn't that culture, but it doesn't mean that fans aren't thinking of those things in a similar way.
All right. I'll take those points as valid, and I'll let Peter weigh in at this point so we don't just keep going back and forth.
The only thing I would say about this is that when it comes to the Silva-Cormier fight, it's you're right, Stevie. It's a no-win situation for Cormier, and, you know, there's always the other side of this. I mean, Cormier could have just signed a waiver. Hello?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay. No, but did you see the embedded video when Dana White told Cormier that Jones tested positive?
I've seen the reaction that Cormier had, like, oh crap, it's over. This fight isn't going to happen. I waited so long for that fight. You've never seen a more dejected man at that point.
No, and it was like him saying, I'll sign a waiver. I'm sure Jones would sign a waiver too if that meant he'd be on that pay-per-view. But, you felt so bad for Cormier, and at that press conference at midnight, he was very dejected, and then I heard Henderson, and I think it was Musashi was rumored, and also Silva. So
at one point everybody was rumored for this fight. Michael Bisping was rumored for this fight. Filthy Tom Lawler was rumored for this fight.
Yeah.
Everybody was rumored for this fight.
I'd heard Jeff Hardy myself, which would have been interesting.
Only if they put his eponymous symbol in the middle of the ring and lit it on fire. That's the only way that would have happened.
You just want to hear Buffer say final deletion.
Brother Cormier, I knew you'd come. All right. Anyway, let's talk about the rest of the fights on UFC 200. We had a very, very noteworthy main event, and not the original main event that we thought we were going to see, but boy, was it one hell of a way to cap off UFC 200. Amanda Nunes proving once again that there are no durable contenders in the women's bantamweight division. The only dominant champion we've had is Ronda Rousey, and once the belt went off her, boy, it's bounced around like a ping pong ball. But Amanda Nunes might be a tough out for the next person to face her, based on that just flurry, that vicious striking that we saw. Miesha Tate looked battered, bruised, and beaten, and this only lasted 3 minutes, but she took one hell of an ass whooping. In fact, 3 minutes, 16 seconds, so make more wrestling coincidences out of that if you want to, Todd.
Yeah, I actually was more taken by Tate and her performance than by Nunes, and that just watching her come out, I mean, I don't know what it was, but she sort of looked despondent as she was coming out. She usually, when she's coming out, she looks happy and excited to be there, and she's got enthusiasm, even for like the Ronda Rousey fights, which were obviously really big fights for. And here it just looked like she seemed mentally defeated before the fight started, and then in the course of the fight, it felt like she just looked mentally defeated. Like there were points where when Nunes landed good blows, she just sort of seemed passive and she was just sort of covering up. She didn't seem to be herself the whole time. I don't know if there's any explanation of that. I still haven't heard one. And Tate certainly didn't let anything on in the post-fight press conference. But I thought it was just a very weird performance from Miesha Tate. Not that it should be any sort of shocker that Amanda Nunes beat her, because certainly Amanda Nunes is a capable fighter, and there's no reason that she couldn't beat Miesha Tate. But I thought just it felt like something was off with Miesha Tate, and I don't know what it was.
I wonder if the strategy going in was, I don't have any pressure because I'm not the biggest fight on this card, so I can just go out there and relax and not have to worry about it, and I'll take her down a few times, and people may hate it, but it's not the main event, so it's no big deal. And then suddenly it got switched to the main event, and in her head, everything changed.
I think it was the pressure of being a champion.
Go ahead, Todd.
No, you guys both, you raised two distinct possibilities. And I mean, I don't know what it is, but I mean, maybe it was the championship getting to her. Maybe it was the profile in UFC 200. Maybe there's something else, but it was a strange performance in general.
But we got to give it to Amanda Nunes. Now she's the champ and a history-making champion. And coincidentally enough, a few hours before this fight, I had gotten a press release where UFC had made a brand new t-shirt. I don't know if they planned it this way. They couldn't have really tried to, because you can't fix a fight, but they released a t-shirt in support of the gay and lesbian community. You know, we stand with what happened in Orlando, and we're showing support and love to all people. And then they have their first ever openly gay champion in UFC history.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that those are related, but they fit together very nicely.
Right.
And,
just the coincidental timing is really awesome there for them.
Yeah, and it was, you know, I think if they had more time with Nunes versus Tate as a main event, they probably would have emphasized that more. I think that was only something they sort of thought of in the last minute when that fight became elevated, because obviously that was something that was sort of lost in the shuffle going into it.
Right. Yeah, it actually became a much, much bigger story after she won the title, because nobody was really talking about it before that point. It was known, but it wasn't the focus, as you said. So, that's our main event, but arguably the other fight that we're going to talk about now was the main draw for a lot of people buying this pay-per-view, was the return of Brock Lesnar to UFC, taking a fight with Mark Hunt and going out there and basically, I guess I would say, if we were going to go back to the Roy Nelson, Derek Lewis argument, Brock Lesnar pretty much did the same thing as Roy Nelson, except he didn't take any damage and Nelson did, and that's the reason Lesnar won.
He also did more damage than Nelson did, particularly in that third round that we were talking about, because he was able to land some solid shots on Hunt over the course of things.
Well, yeah,
but
definitely the third round. He got in some good ground and pound once he got him down in the third.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, that second round, I could have actually scored a 10-10 because it felt like nothing happened for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think a fair number of people did. I tend not to give a lot of 10-10 rounds, but yeah, I mean that's the sort of round that you think of when you think of 10-10.
Peter, what did you think?
You know, sorry, I've just lost train of thought for a second there.
I was like, wow, you're incredibly ambivalent about having an opinion on this one.
Just when it comes to Lesnar and Hunt, right? I'm just going over my notes. I'm just trying to read my writing, and it doesn't make sense what I wrote. It's like, did I actually write that? Was I half asleep? The one thing I took away from this wasn't even what happened in the fight. It's what happened afterwards. How much money Lesnar's getting for this fight?
$2.5 million, not counting his pay-per-view cut.
Because I wrote, Lesnar better be getting $1 million for this. And I'm laughing at my notes right now, thinking how stupid that was.
Yeah, no, the estimated payout, if he has the pay-per-view percentage everybody thinks, and it did as many buys as everybody thinks it will, probably around the neighborhood of $5.5 million total payout.
So, I don't even want to do the math per se, it's too late for me to do that right now, but can you imagine the breakdown of per round what he took home in that fight, just surviving against Hunt, but basically getting the better of the exchanges for 3 rounds and taking home millions of dollars per round for that? That's amazing.
Yeah, I have another way to look at it. Since we're talking about $5.5 million, let's just divide that over the course of 15 minutes, which means he earned $366,666.66 for each minute of that fight.
I'm in the wrong business.
Aren't we all? But then all of us can't beat Brock Lesnar. I mean, he is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of athlete. That's what everybody says. That's the way this fight was built up. And it was a dangerous fight for him to take, having not fought in 5 years. And Mark Hunt, as we discussed last week, is a one-punch knockout kind of guy. And at any time, Hunt could have caught him with that one punch. So Lesnar, I mean, for the same reasons that people are going to dump on Cormier, no pun intended, for dumping people to the ground with takedowns, but they didn't dump on Lesnar because they were excited to see him back. But he fought the same kind of smart, conservative strategy that Cormier did against Silva, except one guy was loved for it and one guy wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key to those two fights is that, again, the sort of the make good at the end, where, and I guess the weight class too, where it's sort of like a fight thrown together last minute, whereas this was built up for a long while, and both guys knew going in, this fight is about me taking him down, or this fight is about me, knocking this guy out, and that was what both guys spent, a month plus preparing to do, and Brock got the best of it.
And
the Canadian Brock Lesnar.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I was kind of wondering about that when I saw the Canadian flag on his shoulders, and I still think of him as a Minnesota guy. I always have and I always will, but then they went on in commentary about how he had built I believe the word they actually used was a compound. They said he'd built a compound for himself in Saskatchewan, and I'm like, did he change his citizenship? Did he get dual citizenship? What is going on? Because, I mean, once they said that and I saw the Canadian flag on his Reebok uniform, I'm like, okay, I guess he's not an American anymore. And then he cut the post-fight promo about America anyway and said, we all need to come together. So, well, I don't know.
I mean, with his compound in Saskatchewan, I mean, he likes being isolated when he's not fighting either in WWE or UFC. I mean, Minnesota, it's a great way to hide yourself. And if you want to find a great place to hide yourself in Canada, you go to Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I guess that's even more remote and rural than certain parts of Minnesota, because I'm sure there are more bigger cities in the state of Minnesota than in the entire province of Saskatchewan. And I don't know that for a fact. I'm just guessing based on geography.
Moose Jaw and Saskatoon are the only two that come to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. So I guess actually I do want to ask Todd about that. What did you think about Brock Lesnar's babyface post-fight speech saying that America, we need to heal, we need to come together?
Yeah, I thought it was, I didn't really have a strong opinion one way or another, honestly. I thought it was sort of cute. I mean, Brock is, he'll do unique little things in post fights. And so him as sort of the peacemaker is sort of an amusing role for a guy that looks like that and fights like that. But I am still smarting rather from the betrayal, him joining up with our most hated enemies. It's really terrible. But
I'm right here.
Oh, good one, Todd. I like it. But Brock Lesnar, and including that post-fight speech when I say this, I gotta say, Brock Lesnar looked like he was having a lot of fun. He was having fun with the fight. He had fun with the post-fight interview. He had even more fun at the post-fight press conference. I don't think I've ever seen Brock Lesnar quite as happy as he was cracking jokes during that post-fight press conference. He seemed to be having the time of his life.
Yeah, this was a very jovial Brock Lesnar.
Clearly fighting is in his blood somewhere because, man, you can tell he loves to do it and wishes he could do this more often.
And
yeah, I think
Sable's looking pretty good too.
Yeah, and she's 48. Yeah, she was looking very good.
48 now? Oh my god.
Yeah, he is younger than her. I mean, there was a little bit of an age difference when they started dating, so there you go. But yeah, she looked good for her age, no doubt about that. And
look good, period, Stevie. Come on.
Oh yeah, I'm not saying that. I agree with both of you, and I think I'll just go out and close by saying I don't think this is the last time we've seen Brock Lesnar in the octagon. I think he'll come back.
Maybe.
I agree. I think he'll be back too.
All right. So 2 other fights on the main card, and then whatever else you guys want to talk about from this one. But let's talk about Jose Aldo and Frankie Edgar. And Edgar, man, he tried so hard. He wanted it so badly, but he was just a step slower, and whenever Aldo would catch him, boy, Aldo made those punches count because he diced him up. By the end of that 5th round, there was no doubt who won.
Yeah, I mean, it was another fight where I mean, I'd sort of liken it to the fight with Claudia and Joanna. And that was sort of what I was hesitating on earlier when we were talking about Claudia and Joanna, because I didn't want to sort of jump all over the place. But this was a fight where if Frankie was going to win, he needed to take over as the fight went on. And I thought in the early going, I thought it was competitive. And I thought Frankie was actually doing better than he did later on. And I was thinking, okay, just like Claudia and Joanna, Claudia was doing well early. I thought that Jose was getting into shots early, but I thought, okay, if Frankie's going to pull away, he's going to pull away in the later rounds because Jose sometimes his conditioning isn't as good as we get later into the fights. But instead, Frankie kept moving forward, but he wasn't throwing as much. I think he just sort of got spooked by Jose's ability to land big shots whenever he moved in. And that was, the story of the late going in particular was whenever he moved in, as you mentioned, he'd get hit with a big shot. He was, bleeding all over the place, and he just couldn't find the right range and get enough output to overcome the fact that Jose just landed with a lot more power. I thought it was a disappointing performance from Frankie, albeit one against an excellent opponent.
I think to me, when you compare the fight to the Gadelha-Jacicic fight, the difference is that Aldo took over much faster than Joanna did. It didn't take till partway through the 3rd round. I thought from the 2nd round on, Aldo definitely was in control.
Well, let me be clear. I was actually thinking of them in the reverse roles, in the sense that just like Joanna, I was thinking of Jose in the Claudia role, in the sense that in the sense that in the fight with Claudia and Joanna, Claudia was dominant early, and then Joanna pulled away at the end. And I was thinking in this one, okay, Jose is doing well early. I thought it was competitive early, but it was closer early. And I was thinking, okay, as we get further in here, Frankie may pull away like Joanna did in the other fight, but that didn't happen at all. It ended up not being like that fight for that reason. And I wouldn't necessarily say that Jose did the opposite of pulling away, because in the 5th round he didn't really do anything. So it was more the 3rd and the 4th round where he did well enough, and Frankie just wasn't able to get going enough to make a difference. So it didn't end up becoming much like that fight. I was thinking that it might be in the early going of the Frankie Jose fight.
Yeah, now I understand a little better what you meant. And I guess I agree with you that in the 5th round he didn't really do much, but my perception of it scoring the fight at home was by that 5th round, he just knew he banked 3 rounds already. The first one was a toss-up, but I had 2, 3, and 4, especially 3 and 4, clearly for Aldo, to the degree that he probably thought there was no way to lose. And you don't want people to coast, and we've seen people lose when they coast, but maybe he just tiny bit of coasting there in the 5th round, just a little bit.
I think that was absolutely what he was doing. And I think it was a mistake. It didn't catch him, but I wouldn't have that mentality, like that, I can just take off here. Because like you, I had Jose winning the 2nd through 4th, but I did see people giving him the 2nd, and I gave Frankie the 5th along with the 1st. So if I had given him the 2nd, like some people did, it's a potential Frankie Edgar scorecard. So I wouldn't have been messing around if I were Jose Aldo, but I think it's exactly what you said. I think he thought that he had in the bag, and he just avoided him.
Yeah. All right, Peter, your perception.
Aldo wanted to make this a statement fight because he knew that McGregor was sitting in one of the front rows there, and there's a great shot of the two fighting, but the camera's focused on McGregor, and somebody captioned it, "When you see your ex with a new guy."
Nice.
And McGregor is just like fuming at the start, like he's intently watching this fight. And I'm just wondering, it's not so much if this fight will happen in the rematch, it's a matter of when. And I don't recall Aldo getting that much damage that would say have this fight, because Diaz and McGregor is coming up soon. Do you think having the rematch in New York City is too soon?
I would think you could do this fight by the end of the year, but I don't know if you could do it in New York, and I think it would depend on if McGregor didn't take any injuries in the rematch with Diaz. And he would have to come out the winner, because I don't think you want to put that fight together if he loses to Diaz the 2nd time. It makes it a much, much tougher fight for him to take before the end of the year.
Todd, what do you think?
I wouldn't be surprised at all if it was in New York. I think they've got a lot of options there, so I don't necessarily take it as any sort of given. But yeah, I think that's a fight they could put there. Even if McGregor lost, because remember, like McGregor lost was it March, and he wanted to fight again in July. So it's a very similar time frame to August to November. A little bit closer, but very, very similar. And yeah, I think McGregor would be up for it, and give it, depending on obviously on how much damage he took, and whether he won or lost, I think it's sort of the same thing. I think he's moving down to face Jose Aldo either way. So I don't think that the outcome would affect things that much, other than if he got hurt.
The only thing that I really wonder about is if they're gonna completely destroy the myth of Conor McGregor in 2016 if they're not careful here, because if he loses to Diaz the 2nd time, fine, okay, whatever. But if he loses 3 in a row, twice to Diaz, and then loses in the title unification match, then it's like, who's Conor McGregor? This guy that we built up as being the greatest phenom, the newest, biggest drawing card ever in UFC history. The guy just lost 3 fights in a row.
Certainly it hurts him, but I think Conor has had enough very impressive performances and talks well enough that he's close to bulletproof either way. He's going to be a big star in my opinion for years to come, provided there isn't a complete collapse. Now, as far as being that tippy top elite draw, that can draw over 1 million a fight, yeah, that's where it starts to come into things. But I think Conor's okay. I'm not as concerned about the individual performances as some people are. I think he's turned in enough good performances that that he's not in a lot of danger.
As always, Todd, you've made a compelling case, so I won't try to counter-argue with that one. I'll just move on to Cain Velasquez making his argument for contention again at heavyweight with a very dominant performance against Travis Brown.
Yeah, Cain looked great. I mean, there's a lot of talk going into the fight questioning where Cain would stand here because, I mean, he's had lots of injuries. He obviously had a tough time of it against Fabricio Verdum. Would we see the old Cain, the Cain we're used to? And we absolutely did. It was a vintage performance against Travis Brown here. I thought he looked great. Showcased some solid wrestling, pulled out a few new tricks out of the bag in the stand up and won very convincingly against a tough opponent.
Yeah, everybody was talking about the spectacular kicks and saying, wow, that's something new in the arsenal. And I'm thinking more to myself, maybe that's just a factor of him not being hurt or coming into the fight hurt, that he had the confidence to go out there and throw that.
Yeah, I mean, who knows?
But definitely, I know you were probably not wanting to use the Michael Coleism there, but it was vintage Cain Velasquez. This was the UFC champion, heavyweight champion Cain Velasquez in prime form. Peter?
When those last 10 seconds were ticking away, I was counting down in my head, 5, 4, 3, it's over. I was thinking maybe this will go to the second round, and Cain, I think some fighters know when they hear those. Some fighters don't hear the clacking of the last 10 seconds, but I think Cain, very good at time management, knows when to pour it on the last 10, 15, 30 seconds. He might have gotten a cue from his corner, we don't know, but when he finished off Travis Brown, and you could see the concern he had afterwards because he celebrated for what felt like half a second and then checked on him right away. He's like, oh God, I really hurt this guy, because he really poured it on that last little bit there.
Yeah, honestly, if it had gone to the bell and it had gone to the second round, I don't think Travis Brown was lasting much longer either way. I think within a minute of the second round, this fight would have been over.
Yeah, he was on, he was probably thinking it was Tuesday by then.
I don't know what you do with Travis Brown at this point after that, because, I mean, he's beaten some top guys. He's been in there with some of the best in the heavyweight division, but the way he got dismantled by Velasquez in this fight, you can't see him going back in there with anybody that's ranked above him right now, except maybe Arlovsky, and doing well.
Mike, you have him fight the guy below him, Brock Lesnar.
That would be fun. If they could put that together, I would pay to see it.
Wow, that's heavyweight division. Jeez. Maybe Derek Lewis?
I feel like Derek Lewis could catch him with a shot and hurt him as bad, if not even maybe a little worse than Cain did.
Todd, who do you think?
I mean, it's the same thing. There are lots of matchups there that I think would be perfectly fine. I mean, he's a good fighter. He's not a great fighter. And, I mean, I just match him with one of the guys he hasn't fought already. I mean, frankly, that's sort of my mentality in a lot of these divisions. I'm not so concerned about, individual matchups. I'm more focused on just get fresh matchups with different guys in the division who haven't fought before. And with Travis Brown, he's a little bit younger than some of the other guys' division, so there's plenty of time for him to fight the top guys and sort of match up with the ones who are around.
Now, I think for the prelims, we need to go a little bit deeper on UFC 200 because there are some stories to tell with these earlier fights on the card. And one of the stories to me is that Johnny Hendricks is no longer the big rig. The way that Kelvin Gastelum just gave him no opportunity to do anything shows that whether or not you believe he was on something before USADA, he's clearly not the same guy after USADA testing, because there was no power in Hendricks, there was no explosiveness in Hendricks, he couldn't stop Gastelum's takedowns, he couldn't really do anything to him.
Putting aside the USADA thing, because, some guys just sort of, trail off in their 30s. regardless of what the reasons are for it, Hendricks very much looks like a fighter in severe decline. I mean, he got beat up badly against Stephen Thompson and did not look impressive at all in this fight. He didn't look impressive at all either. And I didn't even think Gastelum looked that good. I think it was more just a reflection of Hendricks just looking like a fighter that just does not have what he used to have. For whatever reason you want to attribute it to. He was one of the best welterweights in the world, and I don't know if he will be again, unfortunately. I say as someone that appreciates fighters that are really good and likes to see them look really good for as long as possible.
Yeah, well, we're definitely not getting back the Johnny Hendricks that fought George St. Pierre. That guy pretty much seems to be gone forever now.
Well, the only thing that Hendricks gave Gastelum was 20% of the purse.
Oh, nice. Zing, burn.
Hey, and Stevie, don't be too quick to dismiss anyone, because remember who the champion of the division is. You know, Robbie Lawler was a guy that looked like, I mean, I would not have believed you that Robbie Lawler would be a multiple time defending welterweight champion, you know, a few years back when he was a middleweight losing to Lorenz Larkin and looking really bad against Babalu and having fights like that.
That's true. Anybody can have a career resurgence at any time, so I won't completely write off Hendricks, but he's definitely in a downward slump and something needs to change, whether it's his training, his diet, his mentality. Something is not going right for him, and it shows. But
yes,
we also have a couple other interesting stories, like the Zingano-Pena fight, potentially the next contender to face Amanda Nunes. I thought Kat Zingano won the first round, and then it just seemed to all fall apart.
Yeah, falling apart sort of like implies that like something is going wrong. I think she won the first round, and I think Juliana Pena won the second and third round. I didn't view it as sort of anything against Kat. Juliana Pena just got the best of it.
I feel like I should clarify then. I guess I don't mean that she just completely stopped defending herself and stopped doing anything. I just mean that she stopped being capable of doing anything because Pena kicked it into second or third gear and suddenly Zingano didn't seem like she was keeping up.
Yeah, I mean, Zingano very clearly won the first, and Pena very clearly won the second and third, and it was the biggest win thus far in Pena's career. And as you mentioned, it sets her up for some big fights. Even if she doesn't get a title shot next, she should get a marquee opponent next in a division that has its fair share of marquee opponents.
Yeah, and fair share of former champions at this point as well.
Yeah, I think everyone's a former champion at this point.
Starting to feel that way. Peter, what did you think?
I felt that Pena, she listened to something in her corner between the first and second, tweaked the game plan ever so slightly, and then it was a different fighter in round two.
And three.
And three, of course, yes.
All right. Well, TJ Dillashaw and Rafael Assunção had their long-awaited rematch, and Rafael Assunção had been off for, I believe they said, 680 days because of his ankle surgery. Mm-hmm. So the question was this the same Rafael Assunção that beat Dillashaw the first time, or was Dillashaw just that much better after that much time off that he had still been improving while Assunção had been sidelined? So before I get my answer, I want Todd's.
I don't know if we got a definitive answer to that one. I mean, I thought that Dillashaw was a little bit better, and I thought he clearly won the fight. I didn't really see it as sort of an indictment of Assunção, though. I thought it was a close fight, kind of a dull fight. Dillashaw was a better fighter, but you could see the class in both guys, even if it didn't result in a particularly exciting fight. So I wouldn't draw broad conclusions about either guy based on this fight.
I guess I would draw a narrow conclusion as opposed to a broad one, and I would say that Dillashaw, he strikes me as being stuck in the same position that we saw Faber in for so many years, where he's always going to be the guy below the guy now. He seems to have stepped into that role where he can be number one in the weight class and not be the champion. I don't think he's beating Cruz if he gets another shot at Cruz. I feel like it's just going to be that number one and number two from this point on.
Well, I had him beating Cruz, so I have a different perspective. I guess seeing this fight, it made me less confident in Dillashaw's ability in a second fight with Cruz. But I thought that was a super close fight. As I said, I had Dillashaw winning the fight. So if they fought again, I definitely think Dillashaw could win the fight. I'm interested to see the fight, but I think right now, because Dillashaw didn't look spectacular against Sun Sao, that the fight to make is the Dillashaw Uriah fight, since they both have been talking constant trash about each other. So I'd make that fight. I think all likelihood Dillashaw wins that one pretty impressively, and at that point you make the rematch. I think the rematch will be a competitive fight. I could see that going either way.
All right, well, you've set up a compelling case for it, and there certainly is enough bad blood with the fracture of Team Alpha Male and the guys who went with Dwayne Bang Ludwig and the guys who didn't. So there's drama to be told there if they do that fight. But I do agree 100% when you said I'm less confident about TJ in the rematch with Dominic Cruz after this fight, because it was a win and a unanimous win, and all 3 rounds went all to Dillashaw, but it just didn't seem like enough. It didn't seem like this is the statement fight. But if he has a good fight with Faber, maybe that's the statement to get the rematch with Cruz that we're looking for. But let's see what Peter wants to say about these other fights, because we've got several other stories.
There is a couple of things about this fight I want to talk about.
Oh, sure,
One,
sure.
I do not want to see this fight a third time. I think we're in agreement on that.
I don't want to see this fight again. I don't think there's a reason for it.
Yes, Ixnay on the Illogy tray.
And Faber's dance card just got filled up. He's facing Jimmy Rivera at UFC 203 in Cleveland.
All right. Well, let him win that fight then, and maybe then he can match Dillashaw down the road for a big card.
All right. As far as the other fights on this card, I mean, Joe Lozon, Diego Sanchez lasted less than 90 seconds, and Musasi made short work of Santos in 432, and Jim Miller, the only other fighter besides Brock Lesnar to be on UFC 100 and 200, beat Takanori Gomi at 218 in the first round. So, Gomi and Sanchez, are these guys done?
Kind of felt that way watching the way they got taken apart, but maybe Todd has a different perspective. And also, I want to see what Todd thinks about the fact that you completely skipped over Northcutt and Enrique Marin, probably on purpose.
I forgot about that
Probably
one.
no, I think you forgot it on purpose, and I want to get Todd's take on that.
To answer Peter's question first, I think Gomi is on the tail end of his career. I mean, he hasn't looked impressive for most of his fights for a while. But he's a guy where I think you can just sort of put him in fights. He hasn't taken a tremendous amount of punishment. Sanchez, on the other hand, has just been brutalized time and time again. I think he's been done for years. I mean, he's had one impressive performance, since he fought, who was it? Paulo Thiago, back at the card that Kane and Brock fought on, which was like 6 years ago. The one impressive performance since then, in my opinion, that he had was the fight against Jim Miller last time out. He won a few decisions since then, but I thought each and every one of them was a bad decision, with some of them being dreadful decisions and some of them being like horrendous, worst decisions of all time decisions. So Diego Sanchez is a guy that to me has looked really bad for almost every fight for a very long time. And this was another very bad performance. I thought it was also some really bad officiating. I thought that Diego was just taking a terrible beating, and the referee took a long time to stop it. So I didn't like that. As far as Sage Northcutt and Enrique Marin goes, I thought that Sage showed a lot of heart. Marin had him in some bad situations, and he worked through it, and he pulled out the win in the third, when it was still very much up in the air how it would do. With that said, I'm ready for Sage Northcutt to go somewhere else, because the guy just isn't very good, and it really comes across as sort of WWE booking in the middle of a UFC card, where you have this guy who just is so much worse than all of the other fighters on the card, being given a hand-picked, very soft opponent and only barely scraping by. I thought, it was another signal that Sage just isn't that good of a fighter. And if he was a good fighter and he was also young and good looking and had a muscular body, then fine. Nobody's complaining about, bringing in GSP back in the day to the UFC, but Sage Northcutt, I mean, he just isn't that good of a fighter. And there are plenty of really good fighters who are also marketable. in different ways. You don't need to focus on someone just because he seems marketable when he isn't a good fighter. So I'm ready to move on from the Sage Northcutt experiment rather.
Experience.
That would be a name for a band, the Sage Northcutt Experience. He'd be the lead singer. But, if UFC worked like baseball and you could just send him down to the minors without cutting him, that's what I would do. I would keep him in the farm system and send him somewhere like Titan FC for a year or two, where he could just become a better fighter, work his way up against a lesser crop of opponents, get his overall game better, and then come back and still be the pretty boy, but now have the skill set to actually go in there and dominate guys like Enrique Marin instead of just scraping by.
When it comes to Sage, I almost want to put him and Paige Van Zandt back in the oven, so to speak. They're not quite done yet.
No, I feel like there's a lot more Paige Van Zandt upside, especially after seeing this Northcutt fight, because she showed a lot more in the fight with Rose than he showed in this fight with Marin.
Yeah, not to mention her performances against like Felice, who's a solid fighter. Yeah, I don't think it's fair to lump Paige in with Sage. I mean, granted, they both sort of have a similar dynamic in terms of why they're being marketed, but I think that Paige is much farther along in her division than Sage is in his.
100%. I totally agree.
All right, so what about Jim Miller? Like, when you saw him fight at UFC 100, did you say, "Wow, this guy's going to make it a long time and he'll be around for 200"? No one ever thought that, right?
I guess I thought of Jim Miller as being a guy that would always be in UFC forever until he retired, so I never actually doubted that he could be around at 200. He seems like one of those guys who will never go away unless he's forced to retire due to a debilitating injury. He'll just keep fighting.
So he's like Roman Reigns.
Oh.
No, because people want Roman Reigns to go away. I don't think people actually want Jim Miller to go away.
You just called Jim Miller the guy.
won't go away and want people wanting to go away are two different things.
Yeah.
No, I think I'd be fine with Jim Miller fighting at 250 or 300 if he was still healthy and wanted to do it.
Yeah, if he's healthy, go for it. But the way he fights, I forgot he was on 100 when they first said that stat. I was like, oh, that's right, he was. Mm-hmm. But so many shows over 100 and 200, some stuff just gets blended together these days.
I'm just trying to remember now which fictional UFC they invented for the movie Here Comes the Boom, because I think we've actually passed that one now with 200. I think we're now beyond the point where they made up a card for that movie.
I don't think I saw that movie.
You never saw it?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, well, it was actually a pretty funny movie.
Okay.
Go ahead, Todd.
I was going to sarcastically give my approval. I didn't think it was very good myself. But
I didn't say it was a good movie. I said it was a funny movie.
Yeah. Anyway.
And Boss Rutan definitely steals the show in that. I mean, Boss is a guy you can put in any bad movie and he'd probably be good, but he genuinely, because he got to do what he loves to do, it made him even funnier.
Yeah, Boss has got great presence. He's got a lot of star qualities about him.
Absolutely. So, speaking of presence and star quality, were you around for the Hall of Fame induction on Sunday? And if so, what were your thoughts on that?
I was around for the Hall of Fame, but I didn't go to it. I did watch it on Fight Pass afterwards. I thought that Don Fry and Dan Severn in their sort of induction, I thought that was the highlight of them. I thought it was of the night. I thought that the reverence that people have, particularly fellow Brazilians, for Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, is always sort of, I find, touching, because there's so much respect that people have for that guy, and he's such a beloved figure within the sport. So I thought that stood out. The Bob Meyerowitz thing was just sort of there. The P.D. Williams and Mark Coleman thing I thought was fairly nondescript as well. And was there another one that I'm missing? Or is that it?
I think that's everything.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, well, there you go then.
Mm-hmm. Peter, did you watch it?
No, it's sad to say, like, the biggest weekend for mixed martial arts, I had to work 3 shifts in 2 days, so no.
Oh, ouch, I'm sorry.
That's what the internet's for.
Yeah. Well, you made a big point out of the Coleman-Williams fight being added to the Hall of Fame induction last week. So
Yeah.
I kind of figured you were watching it because you were raving about that fight.
Oh, I actually, after the podcast last week, I went back and watched that fight. Just to relive it, just like, it's one of those fights that, you remember watching and you kind of want to see it again. And when we talked about it last week, I was like, I'm actually going to sit down and watch this. Screw it. I'm going to, find it, dig it out of my collection and watch it again.
Well, do you agree now that you've watched it again in more recent terms as opposed to when you saw it back in the day? Do you agree with it being called the kick heard round the world?
Oh. Oh, yeah, it's right up there with Silva breaking his leg.
I mean, I don't know if it's the greatest kick of all time, but what do you say, Todd?
I mean, well, when you say something like the kick heard around the world, I think it sort of imparts an importance to something where, like, nobody was watching the UFC at that point. And granted, it wasn't like the low of the low, but I mean, that was after the fall. So it's sort of amusing and sort of the inflatedness of it. But I mean, it was very distinctive. I mean, that was on the highlights that they would air at the beginning of the shows in UFC for years and years afterwards, even during a period where, like, almost all of the highlights would be of, like, like the UFC 30s or 40s or 50s. And then you had, like, that one highlight of Petey Williams, kicking Mark Coleman in the head. So it was very distinctive. And it also fit during that period where, there was sort of a lesson being learned that the wrestlers weren't going to be able to just dominate the sport on the basis of their wrestling, that there were ways to combat that. And I think that the Maurice Smith fight was more important in telling that story, but the Petey Williams fight was also part of that narrative.
I think you've hit the nail on the head yet again, so no disagreement there, but you did make the substantial point there that it came during the Dark Ages, and I'll give Peter the credit because he made that point on last week's show as well, but it definitely is a memorable visual, and in my own head, I'm flashing back to the first live UFC event I ever went to in, like, 2007, I believe, and I'm pretty sure they showed that in the highlight reel to open that pay-per-view, so it definitely was a staple of UFC video packages for a very long time.
2007, what a newbie.
Well, I'd been watching MMA before that. I just hadn't gone to any shows. Well, no, wait. I'd gone to one show before that. I went to an International Fight League show in the Quad Cities. That technically was the first MMA show I ever went to because that had the Pat Miletich super fight.
Was that against Henzo?
Yeah, that was the very first MMA event I ever went to.
Aha.
Which I actually brought up when I interviewed Miletich a couple of years ago, and he was like, wow, I'm surprised that you were there. I'm like, yeah, that was the first card I went to. What can I say? I guess maybe he doesn't have fond memories of IFL. Actually, I don't know if anybody does, but to me that was a lot of fun because I believe that same night was when Hughes was fighting for the title with, but I don't remember, but there was a Matt Hughes fight going on that same night at the same time I was at the IFL, so I was checking my phone for live updates on Hughes in the main event, and I seem to recall it being a title fight, but I could be wrong. I'm actually looking up Hughes fight history now to see what date that was. So,
well, I'm looking up the Miletich, so we can intersect here. So the IFL one was September 23rd, 2006. So that would have been when Hughes.
Yeah, UFC's number one greatest fight, according to Sports Illustrated, was Hughes and Penn on September 23rd, 2006. So they were the same night.
Aha! Yeah, I was at Hughes versus Penn, so I got the better of it.
you definitely got the better end of that deal. I cannot disagree.
Oh no.
All
right. Well, Todd, I think we've come to the
point. That was actually, I'm sorry, that was originally something of a disappointment because when I bought the tickets for that show to the Hughes BJ Penn, that was originally going to be Hughes versus GSP in the big rematch that I'd been looking forward to forever. And GSP had to pull out because of an injury, and so they replaced him with BJ Penn, and it was a great fight. But at that point, I really wanted to see GSP get his chance. So I ended up driving up to Sacramento for the fight a few months later. But I was there at the Hughes versus Penn. Actually, now that I think about it, I think that was the last show that I just bought a ticket to, and as opposed to being covered by media.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's definitely the time span where I started thinking about my transition. Like after I'd been to a couple shows, after I'd been to the IFL show and UFC 74, I started thinking about, I've got a journalism background. How do I get into this, not just as a fan, but as a reporter? And that's when I started looking for ways to become credentialed and working through Dave Meltzer to cover shows as a reporter. So it was definitely around that same time that I got into that side of it as well.
There are definitely benefits to watching a fight as a fan, cheering and rooting for guys. But the price surely is better as media.
Well, I kind of ribbed Peter about that a little bit when he was going to the show in Ottawa. I'm like, you know what? You're getting to really enjoy the other side of the spectrum now. Now you don't have to shell out money for a ticket. Now you get to see how the other half lives.
Well, there were guys a couple of rows behind me in the stands yelling at the main event because it was kind of slowing down in the fourth round. And they started yelling, "I paid $250 for this," and they got up and started to leave. Like, whoa.
Yeah, now that's one thing I can say as having been on the fan side of the equation is the amount of money that I've paid for a UFC ticket, no matter how bad the fights were, I've never wanted to leave. In fact, I've usually had the opposite mentality is I'll come for the very first prelim fight that nobody seems to show up for because if I paid $250, I'm watching every single one of these.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, although my mentality is the same if I'm covering it or paying it, so I'm just seeing all the fights. Damn it.
Very true. Yeah, I'm standing outside the door before they're even opening it to the media. Like, come on, let me in. I know there's not a fight for an hour yet, but I want to be in there and get set up and be there for the first fight. I'm ready. So anyway, I think I started to go to cheap plugs a minute ago, and we got off on a tangent, but a good tangent, because memories are a fun thing to relive and walk down that historic road that we've all been on. So let's go ahead and get cheap plugs now that we're done reminiscing fondly. So, Todd, what do you want to shill?
I do a weekly column for SureDog that's called The Bottom Line. Every week I have a column up. The column up this week is on Daniel Cormier and looking at his future and sort of what happened with John Jones and advocating for a move to heavyweight, which is what I think is the biggest opportunity for him to build a legacy that's sort of been that ability has been curtailed by what John Jones did. So you can check that out right now at SureDog.com. Also do a weekly podcast with Wade Color called The Fix. It's a VIP podcast talking MMA and pro wrestling at PWTorch.com. So you can check that out there. You have to be a subscriber. But right now they're doing a special, so you can sign up for a discounted rate and try out the PW Torch experience. They got a lot of great stuff there. And for major cards and whatnot, you can go to LATimes.com and check out my coverage of all the major events. Have a ton of stuff up from UFC 200 week. And I think it's all kept in the same little thing. So if you just, go over there, you can find my coverage of all the week's events from Las Vegas at the LA Times website, and also do rankings there, so you can check those out as well. And my Twitter is Todd Martin MMA. So there you go.
All right. Well, I'll do a quick cheap plug before I switch over to Peter because I'm also doing the UFC rankings. So if you go in there and you select down on different writers and reporters, you can pick Steve Jewin, Wrestling Observer, or you can pick Todd Martin, or you can pick whoever you want. But we're both.
Sorry. I do rankings for the LA Times. I do not do the UFC's rankings, so you can't find me there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I thought you were saying you did for the LA Times, you did the UFC rankings.
For the LA Times, I do MMA rankings. So it's all organizations, not just UFC, and I do not submit to the UFC rankings. So
okay.
Take that, UFC.
All right, I'll retract that plug, but my own individual plug still stands that I'm one of the ranking panelists for Wrestling Observer, so you can find my picks there, and if you don't like them, you can send me a tweet at AngryMarks and criticize me for them, as some people have been wont to do in the past, but I think I have been proven right over Rose Namajunas over time. So, with that, I go to Peter for his plugs.
At Hardcore CDN, I don't rank anybody.
Yeah, but you work for the Observer now. You can officially say that.
Yes, I officially can say I'm an MMA contributor for WrestlingObserver.com. That is true.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for Glove Up or Shut Up. So I'll let Peter do the closing plug because that's his thing.
For Stevie and Todd, I am Peter H., the Hardcore Canadian. Thanks for listening, and as I always say, never leave it to the judges. Good night, everybody.
See ya.